Good afternoon. My name is Amy Scott. I'm the Executive Vice President of Research and Interpretation and the Marilyn B. and Calvin B. Gross Curator of Visual Arts at the Autry Museum of the American West. I would like first to thank our presenting sponsors, Leslie and Aaron Kern, for making this program happen, and to all of our 2021 master sponsors. It's an honor, along with the Autry trustees and staff, to welcome you to the Autry Artists Salon. And I would like to begin this conversation by acknowledging that we are coming to you from the lands of the Gabrielian and Tongva peoples, whose ancestors have been the traditional caretakers of what is now the Los Angeles Basin for centuries. This land surrounds us. It is part of who we are, and it's important to recognize that. Joining me from his home today in Berkeley is the Navajo or Dene contemporary artist, Tony Abeyta, who is one of our featured artists in the 2021 Masters of the American West exhibition and sale. Tony was raised in Gallup, New Mexico by creatives, including his father, an artist who served as a code talker in World War II. And he attended IIA in nearby Santa Fe, followed by studies at the Maryland Institute of Contemporary Arts in Baltimore, and then on to Europe, in France and Italy, especially in Florence, a city in many ways that launched the Italian Renaissance and thus laid the foundation for what we now call modern art today. Tony's youth and energy belie a long career that spans the worlds of contemporary Native American art and traditional Western art, making him a leading voice in what I think is an evolving and an important shift within this world of contemporary Western art. That is, artists working in between representation and abstraction, combining inspiration from sources as wide as European art, including Impressionism, Cubism, Surrealism, historical Western art, such as the Tao Society, and of course, their own unique cultural artistic traditions and experiences. Tony has been a recognizable leader of the art scene in Santa Fe and Native art broadly for decades, since he was like 12, I think, probably. And he's had work in the Autry collection since the early 2000s. We most recently added a stunning landscape of erupting volcanoes titled New Formations, which he painted for our Masters 2020 exhibit. His work is also represented in museums around the country, including the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian, the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, the Heard Museum in Phoenix, the Eiteljorg Museum in Indianapolis, and the Museum of Fine Arts, the Wheelwright, and the Museum of Contemporary Native Art, all in Santa Fe. I'd like to remind you real quick before we get going that if you have questions, please enter them into the Q&A feature following our conversation at the bottom of your Zoom window. And just to say that the Autry, like the many diverse collections it contains, represents different things to our audience, to our patrons, and to the artists that are represented within it. To me, this really includes a diversity of contemporary art, and the museum is a place where artists from around the country and across Native America can showcase diverse works that represent the West in all of its spectacular variety. From grand landscapes of the 19th century to contemporary Native artists combining Western and Native values in a way that re-examine the legacies of conquest, of so-called traditional arts. The Autry is here to assert their presence as being at the forefront of this very exciting and evolving genre. So Tony, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, Tony here. Hey, I'm honored to be here this late afternoon. And I'm here in Berkeley, California. I want to say just a quick shout out to Leslie and Aaron Kern for sponsoring this event. And I'm glad to be here sharing a little bit of my story and some of the things I'm working on. And so I'm a little backlit because I got this beautiful California sunshine on me. And I'm going to open up the conversations. And Amy, is there something you want to start with?
Yeah, so we have a great supply of images, thanks to Tony and our friend James. And I thought we would just start with a few of the beginning ones. This one in particular, I think is a great piece to begin with. Because it really embodies that combination of sort of cubism, abstraction, that overall quality to your work in which you really cover every surface of the canvas with kind of a consistent and a uniform pattern, but at the same time, it's super dynamic. and has a lot of allusions to Native imagery, Katsina faces, other aspects of Native design, of Navajo design in particular. So let's just begin at the beginning. Where does this come from? Is it Europe? Is it New Mexico? Is it both?
It's a little bit of everywhere, but it really begins. It's such an interesting story on this painting, which is called the corner of Pico and Powaki. And it's during this period when I was traveling a lot and spending a lot. I had a girlfriend in LA. As I was in Los Angeles and jumping a flight to Santa Fe and then to drive up to Taos. And I'd been thinking a little bit of changing some paintings up, on the whole trip. And so I was driving through Powaki, and I'm like, I think what I'm going to do is finish this painting up and call it Corner of Pico and Powaki. So that's actually what the title of this is. But the origins of some of the movements, it's really marrying and merging a lot of the ritual work that I was doing early in my career, that was trying to delve into American Indian iconography and symbolism. And this painting you're looking at now is a painting of hunting cats based directly derived from Navajo sand paintings, and then how I would interpret it through my own contemporary eyes. So there was it was sort of a, breaking through from being, trying not to be a traditional Navajo painter and be able to merge into modernism and everything that I was seeing and experiencing and learning, which was experiences from my time in Europe, in New York, in Chicago, in Baltimore, and looking and going to museums and seeing so many things, and simultaneously watching what was happening on the Southwestern front, with contemporary Indian artists. And the influences would have been, at this time, would have been like Dan Dominga or some of the later, artists that had traditional iconography, but merging that into modernism and abstraction. So Tony Day, there were a number of artists that were really Oscar Howe that really intrigued me. So what we're looking at here is another painting called, I think it's called Night into Day into Night. And so if you look at the left, it's kind of night. It's everything that transpires in a day. So you're seeing all of these images of activities of things, shapes and forms that are feminine and masculine, and everything that transpires within a 24-hour period, and the cycle of life and how it continues, repeats, and is different and merges, and totally done through abstraction. The literal depiction of something like this I wasn't interested in it. I wanted to create an idea that dealt with shapes and forms and things that weren't recognizable, that the language was recognizable on a subconscious level. And for me, I was just free-flowing painting. I didn't draw out anything. I just did it and refined it and just trusted that the painting would be able to communicate some of the ideas and experiences that I was having.
Some of the forms have also sort of always reminded me of the natural world in like plant forms and seeds, and they're combined with sort of references to anatomy, and then some recognizable sort of stylistic components from Native design, kind of like the meander and the Katsina faces that you were talking about. How do they come to you? Like, what's your working method about, and how do do they just sort of flow from the unconscious, or how does that work?
I was really intrigued and interested in this idea and philosophy, and I'd first read about it really through Harry Bertoia, who is an American sculptor and a heavy influence even on my work, some of his monotypes and two-dimensional work. But he was talking about the artist as a conduit, like that all of the inspiration flows through us, that we're not really that responsible for what comes out. And if we're good at what we do, we're channeling. It could be anything. It could be the divine. It could be the great mystery. It could be all of these things. And for me, it was like, this had to do with night and water, the image you're looking at now, but it was also about other living life forms and the idea that we share the planet with all of these organisms. And as you know, we're in the middle of a pandemic and it's something we can't even see, right? Like, so
Mhm.
it's really mysterious and we have a hard time understanding, like, how did I get sick? I stayed home all the time. And not that these paintings are about germs, but it's about the unknown and what we can't
Mhm.
see and what we can't, it's not tangible or tactile, but they exist and they're extremely within nature, incredibly powerful.
There is, I'm reminded somewhat also of the work of Emmy Whitehorse, another Navajo artist who's also in the collection, where there's this immersive quality. And the painting that we have in particular has little sort of references to sticks and sort of circles and things that to her, I think, come from a much more sort of intimate relationship with the landscape. But they've also reminded me, and what reminded me of her work when you were just talking, is this relationship to sort of the unknown, as well as our bodies and things that we cannot see, because there's always a certain sort of like blood coursing through veins quality that reminds that I think of when I see her work. But let's go, if we're looking sort of at the cellular level, I think let's go to the next image, Rob. Yeah, this is one of my favorites. So I think some of your most powerful work is the black and white work, because there's no color in it to distract the viewer from just the pure sort of sense of form and this kind of just spilling of forms and shapes and references that kind of pour out of your head and occupy the whole canvas in this case, which looks quite big. So let's talk about that a little bit. And the piano, to me, also suggests something else. And maybe you could speak to music
Yeah.
and
Well,
how that
if
shows up.
anybody's familiar with like my work and some of the projects that I've done in the past, like let's say decade, this is one of them, and it's a major one. This is at the Heard Museum. This is for an exhibition called Underworlderness. I like titling things with made up words. I just invent the word. And the idea was about the underworld, which is based on the Navajo creation myth and emergence myth of coming through four different worlds of insects and birds. And so this idea is also a wilderness, which is like a wilderness, underworlderness, and it would be the wilderness of the underworld. And I got this idea of like, okay, so I no one really has a idea about what these mysterious mythological realms were like. I mean, it's all under verbal traditions will tell you that there were a coyote and first man and first woman and all of fire and all of these things were happening. But I could invent this idea about what I thought was there, that there were seeds and there were spores and there were birds and plants that were ready to emerge and to grow. And so there's a small portal at the very top where the birds are flying through. It's an opening in the earth herself, and everything is moving out and forward. And so there's a small space in the middle, which is almost like a funnel that they're all coming out. And in a way, it symbolizes birth and birth of all dark from darkness, all the mysterious things, and everything like coming to surface into the glittering world and the world we're in it now. But all of it also inspired through music. So I like the piano. Like when I went into the Heard, so they paneled up, they built a wall over this mural because I initially did it to paint over, and they said, "Hey, we kind of like it. Do you think we can keep it?" And I said, "I guess so, but you have to have exhibits of other people's work." I said, "Well, we'll build a wall over it." So it's been like exhibited like maybe 2 years ago. Now I think the wall is built over it now because they did an exhibition for Nicholas Galanin. They
Mhm.
built the wall back over it. And then in maybe 2 years or 3 years, it'll open back up. And the funny thing is people think, "Oh, wow, you just did that mural." And I'm like, "No, it's been there." It just appears that that's the case. So that's a story about that.
That is cool. I think a lot of people tend to assume that landscape and landscape art, including yours, is really about the surface of the land. But what you're saying is sort of this underworld, this geology, like this mythical geology that exists within and underneath the surface of all cultural landscapes. Certainly, this
Yeah.
is a cool piece.
Yeah, and Amy, I wanted to backpedal too because you'd
Yeah.
mentioned Emmy Whitehorse, and she's working so much in the same vein of dealing with nature and this like mysterious realm that is really beautiful and poetic and soft spoken and like really amazingly feminine. And on the other hand, I kind of picked up the masculine version of this, and so what I was dealing with was much more like harder, progressive jazz, with a lot of it. Music playing a huge role in the work itself. I would be remiss to not mention that so much of this I'm listening to different music, and it does have an effect and inspire. Some of these drawings became very maximalist, some of them more soft spoken and were calmer, but I was really looking for repetitive shapes that would be like, if you were looking at some of these, they would be like percussion, string. They were very very intense Wagner moments in some of them, and then there were, it was like quiet Chopin, right? So, and that's not the music I'm necessarily listening to. I'm listening to hip hop, and I'm listening to Coltrane, and I'm listening to um, post punk, and really a spectrum of music. I'm almost embarrassed to say how wide the spectrum is, but it had an effect on traditional ideas of ceremonialism. So what I took with me is like my own cultural ideas and values and experiences, and then I informed them with contemporary ideas, influences, and made them hopefully at their best um, authentically, my own. And of course, everybody influenced these. So many people say, "Hey, I see Paul Klee in there," and I'm like, "Sure, I know who he is," but often there's people that I know who they are, but they weren't the original source of my inspiration. There were other people that were more important for me that were following the same paths, right? So
Mhm.
like I mentioned Harry Bertoia, like those sculptures to me are like so epic. Is one of the most uh, dwarfed art American artists. He's probably one of, I like him better than Calder. Calder's fun and colorful, but then I really take a look at some of those Sonambient sculptures that he did, and those are really much more influential on my what I do as an artist.
There's also just kind of visually, I'm picking up on this particular painting, sort of it's reminiscent of what Picasso did with African masks, right? But of course, he was very much an outsider to that culture, whereas this is something that seems to be, I don't know, more genuine or authentic or sort of enthusiastic, in that it does not require a degree of appropriation. But it's beautiful and it's haunting. I don't know if that's deliberate or not,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah. I like when people, the adjectives that come, as response. You have to remember these are big. That drawing is probably, I think it's 60 by 80 or something. It's pretty big. I think it's 90 inches long. So I think that's actually 70 inches by 90. So it's like huge. It's like really uber big.
yeah, and that would be very all encompassing, I would imagine, if you're standing in
Yeah.
front of it. Like it would just sort of overwhelm you or envelop you. Let's go now. Speaking of geologies and sort of underground, I think, geologies, let's look at some of your landscapes, more like classic landscapes, I would say, that have both a monumental character, very much, kind of in the tradition of those grand landscape painters. I'm thinking of, Thomas Moran's Grand Canyon scene with that crazy thunderstorm back from 1874. But also clearly it has a lot of cubism into it. And so a lot of your landscapes can be talked about as cubism. But rather than do that, I want to talk about weather, because that gets also to some of the climate works that we're going to see at a little later. And there's an intensity and a drama to your skies. There's a lot of thunderstorms. There's a lot of sort of swirling clouds. Yeah, like this one. where does that come from? Where does the intensity, where does the atmospheric intensity come
Um,
from?
so these happen, not that I didn't make a conscious choice. I'm going to be a landscape painter now. I was no good at doing landscapes, believe me. The first landscape I did, I tried to sell for like, I don't know, $1,500. Nobody bought it. I had it forever. I was running my own gallery, and a lot of the early deity work is what people wanted. And so an abrupt change of imagery was not a good idea at the time, but it found its own voice because I was spending more time in nature. So I was outdoors. I moved to Taos, and I was hiking and doing a lot of stuff outdoors and exploring and looking at like the landscape through the eyes of all of those other landscape painters that came before me. So, you know, people like Bloom and Shine, and certainly, like, if you look at this painting, oh gosh,
Dosberg?
Victor Higgins and Dosberg, those guys all had this like amazing effect, because I looked at the landscape and I said, that looks like Dosberg. I know exactly what he's talking about with those angles and, you know, these planes, and he's taken it and simplified it in the later drawings. And then I looked at the beautiful intensity of Victor Higgins and like mood, and I like could feel the emotion. I could, you know, that funeral scene and Mountains, and I was married to a Pueblo woman and had kids, and I was soaking in hot springs, and I was right there in the middle of this. Is so much part of who I was really married with an umbilical cord to the vernacular of northern New Mexico. And I discovered it in a way. This is the Black Mesa that's at San Ildefonso. And I painted this with a broken hand. I broke this hand right here, and I had to get surgery on it. And for almost a whole year, I couldn't use it. So I taught this hand to paint. So the only thing you'll notice about it is some of the rain is like kind of going one direction and then going the other direction, but I really liked it because it slowed me down. And this painting merged into what you saw in the very earlier painting, which was the Grand Canyon. It taught me to have patience and to not rush things and to look. And so that landscape of the Grand Canyon was heavily influenced. I said, who am I going to look at when I'm painting the Grand Canyon? And that was just an idea. I sat up at the Grand Canyon for like a day and said, I'm going to paint this. And I didn't know how to paint the Grand Canyon, but I figured, you know, who I would look at is Thomas Moran, because he lived there and he knew exactly. And then I looked at his foreground and I said, that's Thomas Moran, but this is Tony Abeyta. I got to paint this sky as the way I experienced it, and it changes all of the time. Grand Canyon is never the same painting. Like if you started painting it, you know, 10 o'clock in the morning, there's a different landscape by 11:30. So this is in the collection of the Smithsonian. I sold this to them, I don't know, 6-8 years ago or something. But it's one of the paintings I'm really proud of, because it really took me to look and slow down. And I really had to go to that Grand Canyon 3 or 4 times before I could finish it. And so it was an experience. It's documenting an experience.
Well, I'm sure that part of the reason behind that purchase, or the decision to purchase that, was the fact that they have that Moran also.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah.
In their collection.
Moran is actually at the Renwick.
Right.
Is that part of the Smithsonian?
It's part of the Smithsonian, yeah. Moran sold it.
I saw them and I was like, oh my God, I couldn't believe how amazing those paintings are. If you haven't seen them, of the Grand Canyon in Yosemite at the Renwick Gallery.
Extraordinary.
So
and Yellowstone, yeah. Some of the first, sort of landscapes that put American art, on the map back in the 1870s, and helped form actually the national park idea. But how do you, which actually raises another interesting question, is when a landscape like the Grand Canyon, how do you as a contemporary artist approach a landscape like that, which has been so done so many times? It's such an iconic landscape. And, Moran, in a lot of ways, made it famous, but so many others have gone there after him and before you. Do you not find that you don't find that somewhat intimidating or sort of aggravating to have to overcome it? Or do you just approach it as your own? Do you think about that or
Yeah.
not?
Well, look, Amy, it's like the objective of any artist is to be authentic, to be able to have your own voice in your own work. That when somebody looks at a painting of mine, or better yet, when they look at a landscape, that they're looking at a sunset and they say, "Wow, that looks like a Tony Abeyta
Mhm.
landscape," and they recognize it as my hand. You know, that there's a certain way that I do things, and there's other artists working in, very similar interpretations. And you look at Ed Mel's work, and
Mhm.
Ed, who's a friend of mine, like, he knows, and I know, I look at his work and I think, wow, he really tackled this beautifully. But I don't look for inspiration from his work, but we can see through the same lens. Like, we really can say, wow, like, I think I saw the same landscape through the eyes of Maynard Dixon, or I saw this through, a Taos founder. Like, these guys really had their own unique voice. And it was like, how do you learn all of this stuff and see it and experience it? And then you have to unlearn it and say, well, this is my own. And the only way to do it is just to be in it. These are emotional landscapes. I understand the vernacular of New Mexico. I go out and I fish and I look at the sky, I pull over. I don't always shoot pictures. I just sit and stare and I make these like angles of like, how does this mesa fall, and how does this river move, and how do these explosive chemises happen in the foreground? Then it all comes together. And so it has to feel right as rain, right? And it
Mhm.
has to be by my hand. And so when you look at the work, it should feel like that's a Tony Abeyta painting. It's not somebody else. Nobody else could do it but me. And that's the way I want the work. That's the objective. But the objective is also to like really take everything that I've learned and experienced and create something that is honest. Like, it's an honest depiction of what I'm experiencing in my life. And this is who Tony is. I'm not an installation artist. I'm not a video artist. I'm a contemporary guy. I come out of the 80s. But the work for me is relevant because it's my experience. Like, this is who I am.
Mhm. There's an energy and an intensity to it, I think, that also speaks to, the New Mexican landscape, and the sky in particular has a certain sort of drama in and of itself that just really doesn't exist anywhere else. And I think, even more so than a lot of the Taos artists, that you capture that. Rob, I think there might be a sculptural piece. Yeah, so you've been talking about sculpture a little bit. And I wanted to ask about the relationship between sculpture and painting in your work, because a lot of artists, um, you know, do one and then try to do the other, and they just can't quite pull the transition off. But there seems to be more of a seamlessness between these two mediums in your work. And is that how do you navigate those two very different mediums in your head when you're planning a sculpture out?
Yeah. I didn't, again, have the objective to, I'm going to be a sculptor. I studied stone sculpture in the south of France years ago, which has nothing to do with the way I create sculptures now. But I was working with,
Chisel.
chisels and hammers and grinders, and I was like working in the quarries in the south of France in a place called Lacoste. And so then I started creating these canvases, like putting together like puzzles and making them happen like that. And then that segued into the three-dimensional idea that it almost felt like jewelry, the way I was carving stuff, the way I was banging and hammering stuff. And so I started creating jewelry. And so one of the real, you know, uh, distinct things about the jewelry is the damn beautiful turquoise. I was nuts over turquoise. I was learning about it. I was finding it and sourcing it from all over the place. That's Lone Mountain. That's really, really amazing, beautiful, high quality Lone Mountain. Came from the guy in my hometown of Gallup, New Mexico. But I hand chose every single one of those stones for this bracelet. And so the
Mhm.
turquoise was paramount. And then I was sand casting all of the work, which made it easier because I didn't have to carve anything. Like I basically, would carve into tufa and draw out stuff, and then I have somebody help me refine it because I'm a little bit quick and lazy handed, and somebody could fine tune and say this will work. You got to dig this deeper. Like okay, and then I was sourcing great coral,
Mhm.
and all the stones was just, I was having a blast with it.
Mhm.
So this
That's
is the
cool.
bracelet that I did. It's one of the latter works that I did. I've slowed down on jewelry because I'm a painter, but I enjoy doing jewelry. And I come from a whole family on the reservation. Last time I was on the reservation was about a year ago. And I went to go visit all my relatives, which are in Tuahajile, which is Kenyoncito. And it's closest to Albuquerque. We're the eastern band of Navajos, right? And and they said, "Oh, Tony," and they were trying to sell me something, like they're trying to sell me some jewelry. And I was like, they go, "Come on over, come on back here." And they took me to this little shed that's been there forever. I've never been in there. And they showed me that whole little workshop, and there's like 6 guys working and doing stuff and doing really amazing jewelry. And I was like, wow, my father was a jeweler, and all my family on the res are like relatives make really beautiful handcrafted jewelry and show at Indian market.
Mhm.
And I never referenced or sourced any of that. But actually now, one of the guys I hired to do a lot of the details on my work, like finishing or bezels, because I don't really do the bezels. It takes forever to like saw each one of those little prongs. That's my cousin from the reservation. So
Mhm.
he does that. So I'm kind of working with an industry of my own, not only my own people, my own family, my own blood. So it's really beautiful to have that connection and have found that. He was Cody Sanderson's assistant. And he goes, "I'm your cousin." I'm like, "I know who you are. I remember you were a kid. We used to fight." And now he's doing all this, help, and he'll give me ideas. He'll say, like, you don't have to do it this way. You can do it this way. I'm like, yeah, wow, very cool. Caraco Lake, uh, I go to my friends and say, "How do I drill this turquoise without breaking it?" And like, well, you got to wet it and keep it wet the whole time. Don't let it get any temperature; it'll crack that stone. So I can drill it, put the beads for the eyes and the mouth in there, right? And then take it and slowly grind it on the lapidary wheel to give it a really softened feel. And this isn't sandcast, that's all chiseled, channeled, chased work on there, and done flat. And then I have to curve it and bend it in certain ways. But I learned how to be a jeweler really quick. And some people say, "Oh, Tony doesn't do all that stuff." And I was like, I do a lot of it. You'd be really surprised to see how it all manifests.
So this has a lot of, I want to ask about the combination of sort of the traditional and the contemporary, which is also part of your painting, obviously. But it makes this bracelet look really, really unique. Um, there are aspects of traditional work here, but to me, it has like a punk rock, like spiked quality to it. Like it's aggressive and yeah. And is that a thing? Am I onto something there? Or how do you innovate when it comes to jewelry making, especially, which has its own just
So it's
incredible,
it's
rich
it's
history?
my opinion, that and the most punk thing about some of this jewelry is that often people say, "Oh, I couldn't buy that because I would never be able to wear it. It would catch on my sweater, and it doesn't fit in with my world of, like I would be worried of stabbing somebody with the little sharp points on there." And I guess me and like, I don't give a dang. Like I'm making a sculpture. And if you can look at it as an object and as a sculptural piece of art that its origins could have been a bracelet. I think if you're trying to wear a bracelet like this every single day, it's the wrong bracelet. There's so many people who are doing conventional, jewelry, and they're doing amazing stuff right now. It's like one of the most epic times in Navajo silversmithing to watch some of the work being done. There's some really good cats out there, and you all know who they are. But with these, like I had this in my house. I'm going to keep one of these for myself, and I'm just going to keep it. And I just put it up on the mantle, and I'll look at it like it's an object and think, all right, it's built like a centipede. So those are all little arms and tentacles like a centipede. And so on each side of it at the bottom are two little faces and heads, but it's like a millipede, like almost like a millipede. And at the same time, there's all of these chambers and organs, which are the turquoise part of it. And so the people that I look to for the inspiration and how I create and make McKee Platero, like McKee's like champ, like he's one of my favorite jewelers of all time because he just took traditional Navajo jewelry silversmithing and he created this whole language that's very playful. He has kind of sexual things happening with them that are kind of covert, but simultaneously just good design. Like there's some things I don't get that other jewelers get. Like they are conventional, they know how to make a size, 5 with a 1.5 inch opening. I'm like just making it as it's a work of art. And I don't always think if it's going to fit you. Often I can make it fit. Like I can size it up or size it down. I've learned how to do that. So I know that that's a possibility. But the way that they're designed is to be sculpture first. I mean, my preference to a lot of these is like these are the bracelets that should go in a museum because no one gets to wear jewelry in a museum and no one has to worry about it like fitting anymore. It gets to be an object that people look and say, if they don't like what I do as a jeweler, they can say, that's at least good turquoise.
Well, that also explains in part, its anthropomorphic quality. I'm glad you brought up the centipede and the millipede thing because I was struggling to figure out like what this piece resembled. And it has this energy, it has this life. You can sort of imagine it kind of like squirming around. I wouldn't be surprised if it like started to walk off. So you should maybe keep your eye on it.
Berkeley Hills. So I moved to California. I've been here now, like I think almost 7 years. And this is Berkeley Hills. People say, oh, that looks like it could be Italy or it looks like it could be South America.
My first thought, really.
It's really like Berkeley's built on this big, huge, like people, if you ever look at the those paintings by some of the Bay Area artists like Diebenkorn, some of the earlier, paintings, and like, I don't know what those are, but they're like very vertical landscapes because that's what the landscape here is. It's just like, it's very vertical and houses are like right on top of each other going up this huge hillside that cascades down. Like when I walk up my driveway, I'm walking up my driveway. And so it sort of earmarked this period in my life where I needed to change my own vernacular. Like I felt like such a New Mexican brown guy. Like I was this guy from New Mexico. I'm this Navajo guy and I studied on the East Coast and spent time in Europe. But I needed to, like, I love urban environments. I love music. I like eating good food and I like, and the great thing about Berkeley is all my friends here, all these like really intellectual UC Berkeley people who are filling my head full of things like, global climate change. And they're talking about like everything. And the coffee bar that I went to this morning, I'm waiting there for my coffee. I'm half awake, and there's a sign on the door, and it says, "Please refer to our employees in a gender neutral manner." And I was like, "There's Berkeley for you, right?" I was trying to, what does this mean? It means I can't say him or her or that. I get confused, but it opens and expands my brain to think of the alternative to a larger changing world. And that's what I love. So California was part of that. I
And
still go back to New Mexico.
Piece. Yeah.
So I'm in New Mexico. I was just there, I don't know, Saturday. And it was a beautiful sunny day. These are magpies. I love magpies. And so I do a lot of this is from a show that I did for my gallery, Owens Gallery, which is called Music for the Sky. And it was all about just that idea, like music for the sky, what meant that, the vibrations from everything from the earth and what we do. And then it merged into, this is a raccoon that came from Treasure Island. If you've ever been between San Francisco and Berkeley, they got this island and there's raccoons that eat churros. And the original painting had a churro. I took his picture, but I thought it would be more appropriate to give him a fish because I finished this up for the pandemic and I was fishing all the time. And I thought of this raccoon as a fisherman. And so I just liked him. I liked the idea of him going down there and getting to fish and eating it.
Let's, Rob, if you can fast forward to some of the images at the very end, because we're running close on time. And I want to get to, speaking of like the drama of the landscape, I love this painting. I have seen that in person. That's incredible. But let's look at the one that has the tornadoes in it. And then let's talk about the changing world, this painting. Now, this stuff, I've known your work for a long time. I've known you for less, but this landscape, these dramatic, not just the regular sort of New Mexican weather drama, because there's there's the afternoon monsoon storms that come in and out on a pretty routine basis, and beautiful clouds in the sky. But this takes it to sort of another level in terms of intensity, with these really dramatic and even destructive kinds of environmental or atmospheric phenomena. So, and tornadoes certainly aren't native to New Mexico, or are they? But how did what made the turn from beautiful and sort of dramatic New Mexican skies to this very intense, almost destructive kinds of weather events?
So all of it is entangled with a lot of different things. Some of it is, affected and influenced by politics, of the day and time. And certainly with our planet changing and global climate change, the day that I painted this painting, the day that I finished it, I started it and worked on it for about 4 months. But when I finished this painting, I got on the phone with one of my mentees, this friend of mine, George Alexander, and he's like, "You're painting a tornado, Tony? Did you know that 160 tornadoes touched down in Oklahoma just this afternoon?" And I was like, 160 tornadoes? And he goes, "Yeah." And one of my other friends, Stephen Paul Judd, he's like, "Yeah, I picked up my car and threw it in the neighbor's yard." And I was like, the world that people are living in this country is different than the world we're living here. And the same rings true with politics. Often, people in the Midwest, some of the politics of their vernacular do not apply to Californians. And they're like, "Oh, you California liberals, and you guys are ruining this country." And I'm not going to get into politics, and I'm sorry I'm going here. But what I am saying is that the perceptions are different about different things. So here, you, as a viewer of my work, you may see a tornado, but what I'm really trying to address is that there's change at hand, and the change is incredibly powerful, and that we have to recognize the power of nature, and that we're seeing it right now. I did this pre-COVID, but COVID is like one of the most, like, had such an impact, and it completely crippled us. And it's like emerging from some natural phenomenon from, I don't know where it came from, but we have it here. And this is kind of one of the just it symbolizes change, power, nature, and in these is some sort of concept of God. If you go back to the volcano.
Yeah, let's look at one of those, which is a spectacular. It has almost 3 mountains, this painting. Yeah.
Yeah, so the volcanoes, there you are. It's like this eruptive, like, it's not about it being threatening. And you know what? This may be a volcano that existed millions of years ago. And it has nothing to, it's not like the world's coming to an end. What it's saying is that the earth has always gone through changes, and it reinvents itself. It changes the landscape. We see destruction and obliteration of the sky, but maybe this volcano is creating an island. And on that island, a culture will birth, and something else will manifest from a new place, a new home. So there's beauty and change, and that it's not always graceful. And so I do want to open up dialogues with the work about global climate change because it's happening. And it's not like people don't know, but I tell you what, when in like 60 years, when they say what was happening, what were the artists doing when all of this was happening? They're like, well, Tony Abeyta, he painted this tornado and these forest fires when California was on fire. And that was like back here and then. I want to comment on it without being overtly political about it. It's not about destruction of the landscape. It's about the reality that things are changing. And if you're not paying attention or denying it, you're missing the opportunity to make conscious decisions on how you're going to adapt, because it's all about adapting at this point.
Mm-hmm. There's something else I think you said to me at Masters last year. We acquired a similar painting that it was like a quintessentially Western landscape in a lot of ways, because so much 19th century Western art, of course, is about the grandeur and the drama of the Western landscape, and I liked that kind of resonance. It made a lot of sense, especially also when you think about sort of the renewal and the restorative properties, and that this, while it appears apocalyptic in a lot of ways, really has kind of a hopeful or a more optimistic message.
Yeah.
But we are getting into the Q&A session, so I should probably
maybe show the last slide, and then
yes.
we'll segue into some questions, and I try to answer them as quick as I can. So this is the last painting that I've been working on. It's pretty big. I think it's 60 by 80 or something. No, it's bigger than that, 70 by 80. Oil painting. And I think the title of this painting is called From Where I Was Created, or something equivalent to that. But it's about a cycle of life, of everything that encompasses all of the things that happen to us in our lifetime. And it is about different experiences. It's about, family and adventure and spiritual revelations. And how do you paint something that talks about cycles of life, the people that have affected you and influenced you, and all of these things? And I can only think of taking a small symbol, taking something from each one of those experiences, an experience of going to Japan, an experience of buying a house in Italy, of having 2 children, of living in isolation and quarantine. All of these things are epic in this journey of life, and you can't paint all of them. You could write a better book about it, right? So you can write this amazing book, and 100 Years of Solitude, and you can describe all of the time frames and chapters, but within a painting you can only sort of capture an idea of what it could feel like. That it feels like something in motion, something that's cyclical, that is tied to altruism, of gifting, of sharing, of getting older, of letting go of the irresponsibility of youth, and simultaneously having like great times, falling in love, falling out of love. I do those paintings too, and they're all abstract. If they were literal, like a breakup and there's a sad guy and there's a girl walking off, and they say that bores me, I'm really interested in that. But the real meat and the potatoes of trying to capture some of the things in describing what life feels like, that's what this painting strives to be, without being too literal and saying, oh, okay, here's 1974, and here's 1986, and here's 2006 when I quit drinking. There's so much stuff that you can try to tell in the narrative, and painting has its own way of telling its own story. And like I said earlier, as a painter, I'm a conduit. Like, all of this stuff comes through me, and I take a brush and I paint it, and I put it down because it's coming from external to my own self. I am this conduit, and I believe that as many artists, it's not an original idea. That comes from many artists who say, like, I'm not even responsible for my own work. It has happened through me and to me, and all I do is create it and share it with you. So that's kind of the everything. I enjoyed being here. If you have any questions, I can answer them for you.
Yeah, let me read a couple out because we do have a number. The first says, what are the challenges of working in different media? You do painting, mixed media works, jewelry. What is it like learning to make jewelry? And perhaps you can talk a little bit about the work that goes into Native American jewelry as opposed to commercial jewelry.
Yeah. I wouldn't say there's challenges, but when you're learning or doing something new, you get kind of self-conscious. Like people will look and say, um, "Oh, you could, I could do that better. Or I did something like that." Like my friend Cody Sanderson will tease me, and he'll say, "Already did that bracelet. I already made something like that," and I'm like,
Mhm.
"Yeah, but now I did. Now I made it better." Or whatever. We just tease and joke. But with sculpture, there's a learning curve. So I guess that is a challenge, but it's exciting, right? Because I get to do something different. And if I was doing the same thing again and again and again, like one thing I hope no one says about me is like, Tony's a one trick pony. He just does the same thing all the time. Well, I don't know if that would be fair, because I do try to add spectrum and variations to how I work. I'll hold the brush in this hand instead of this hand. I will, erase, and I'll use a sander. I'll work on drawings. I'll work on landscapes. I'll do abstractions. I'll do jewelry, and that could be in 1 week. There you go.
Great. Thank you. There's a bunch of others. Let me try to find
I'll make them quicker
more.
answers because I realized we only got like 6 minutes.
Yeah, no, I think people are, this is just also fascinating. Here's an interesting one. And then I would like also to have just a couple minutes at the very end to kind of look around your studio if we can, ever so quickly. Maybe there's a master's painting in there that we could get a quick peek at. But this question is a very thoughtful one. It says, Tony, you mentioned that experience equals relevancy and that your hope is to open up dialogue. Do you ever think about how your paintings that end up in either private collections, but specifically museums, can emphasize the experience you're trying to communicate to a larger audience than just the individual collector? How does the artist ensure their work is both personal and universal?
Big question. I'll order and I'm going to answer it.
5 minutes, go.
Okay, so I feel like what's happening with, trying to get work into museums, to get into larger collections and exhibitions. I've been selling to private collectors forever and ever. So I have a comprehension and understanding of how that works. Some people buy it because it looks good and they want to hang it above their couch or on the fireplace entryway. I've been doing that since I was 20 something. And so my real goal is to do the big major works that are epic, that are challenging, that also fit into this definition of contemporary Native American art, so that there is a progressive movement that has happened since 1978, that there are this whole movement of young artists or even older artists who are just finally getting recognized. And if you aren't paying attention on the auction market, these things are hitting off the charts. Whoever thought like, oh, wow, T.C. Cannon, $2 million. That's the world record for a Native American work of art. Like $2 million is a lot of money for a painting. It would be like a Chiefs blanket could do that kind of number. But here we are living in this time where artists are finally finding their place in larger collections, thanks to great institutions like the Autry, thanks to like Crystal Bridges, thanks to the Peabody Essex and the Hood and the Nerman Museum and all of these institutions, which are looking at Native American art as being, this is what's been missing. This is the missing part of American art, is that work done by Native American artists. And I want to fit into that niche. I want to be part of this conversation and dialogue. But guess what? I don't get to make those decisions. The art world decides where I belong. It says, maybe you just belong in like above the fireplace and the couch. And maybe that's what I don't get to decide, but I do my best and try hard. to
Mhm.
to responsibly place the work, to do quality work, to never shortcut, never sell myself short, not to head down the commercial like glitter, lights of the dark alley of making just money. It doesn't matter to me at this point. As long as I get to eat my dessert and get a steak once a week, it's good.
You
That's
Before we take a look around, what you said just reminded me of something I think also that I've gotten to learn a little more about as I've gotten to know you, and those are your ambitions, your curatorial practice. And you mentioned mentoring as being an important part of your work, and I know you've got a number of younger artists that you work with and who look to you. Why is it important to have Indigenous curators curating Indigenous work?
it's makes sense, right? Like it makes sense for me. Like I'm curating a show for Museum of Indian Arts and Culture right now, and I've done other curatorial projects specifically dealing with contemporary Native American artists. And like, why would I be qualified for that? Well, I know all of them. I knew all of them. I exhibited with Alan Hauser back in the 80s, and I've shown my work with numerous other artists, and I've been to their studios. I know them. I collect their work. I'm a collector of contemporary American Indian art. They're friends of mine. I've drank with them. I've not drank with them. I've um, understand. I've had dialogue with them. I know their family. I know their kids. I go to their barbecues, jump in the pool with them, um, sleep with them. I mean, like I've had this amazingly colorful adventure with Native American art. And so I love curating because I know the best of their work. I can look at something and say, this is the painting that I need for this exhibition. I know, and where do I get it? I get to source it. I know the museum. I can call the curator there. Can I borrow the painting? Sure, Tony, we'll loan you the painting. And all I need to do is come up with a budget. So I love doing that. Mentoring, the same thing. I think everybody needs a little helping hand. So I work with young painters, Native American painters, and from the Institute of American Indian Arts, I have them come over and work as studio assistants. I have them, they call me on the phone. Should I show with this gallery? Should I do business with this person? I'm like, no way, don't do it. Here's why. Or, yes, it's good for your career, but be careful. Slow down. There's no hurry. You got all the time in the world. So the teaching part, I teach adjunct at the Institute of American Indian Arts, and I taught a class while I was here in Berkeley at UC Berkeley, because I have had experiences, not because I'm super smart, not because I'm brilliant and I write books, but like I actually have been an artist since I was 20 something. I could tell somebody how not to like, you know, do art just for money. That at the end you'll hate yourself, and you'll look at yourself and you'll hate your work, and then you'll be, wow, this is a sucky career to be in. And it's about being passionate and also some sense of altruism. If I can't help other people, what good is all this insight and knowledge that I have if I can't like share my own experiences about other people's art and say, hey man, you really should get a work of art by, or I'll tell museums, it's like, you got to get a Cara Romero, get a damn Cara Romero. Eric Paul Rees, you know who he is? Go check him out. Nicholas Glenn and Shanupa Luger. Like, what are you sitting on your hands for? And why are you trying to buy more shoulder? Like everybody, like shoulder, we need shoulder. I'm like, no, you don't. You need Chanupa. You need
Mhm.
Nicholas. You need Kara and Diego. And I could go through a whole, list of these people. And why? Because I believe in their work, because I've seen everybody like on their come up. I've watched their careers explode. I've watched them live and paint, show with Elaine Horowitz, and then at some point they're gone. And I was lucky to know them all. Like you know, most of the movers and shakers I've known as friends or shown my artwork with, and or collect. So it's not about being like trying to get attention for myself. So I think I'm actually qualified to do some of the things just from my own personal experiences with people and the genre of Native American art that I'm familiar with.
So then you are the one making those choices, or, and oftentimes of what is in the museum. I mean, that's, I think, an important power to turn over to Native artists and Indigenous curators. But I know we're at time. For those who are still with us and who have the time, maybe you can just give us a little like 2-minute tour, because everybody loves to see an artist.
Okay, so right now we're 2 minutes over, but if you guys don't get mad, let's see, how do I do this? Okay, this is Berkeley. This isn't really my studio, but this is where I live here, and it's kind of beautiful. There's a big painting of mine that is up there. Flower bombs, and I collect these bowls from Hawaii, and this is a painting I'm working on right now, here in my makeshift living room studio, and it's going to be for the master show, and it'll change quite a bit, but New Mexico adobe kind of thing. And then another one here which I'm just working on, right there, that's that's sunshine on my shoulder. But this is another one which is sitting on a Sam Maloof music stand, which I love Sam. He was a dear friend of mine. This is right here, still life that I'm doing right now. And the rest of the stuff is really big drawings and things that I've been working on. You can see it's just like, California sunshine right now. I listen to music, records. I have a lot of records, so that's my other thing. I just sit on the couch right there, listen to music, look outside, and that's just my world. I just thought I would share a little bit of that. It's not like some of the fancy cribs that you guys got in LA, but it's where I live. So I hope you all enjoyed this salon, and I look forward to seeing you when things are clear and we can actually gather and embrace and hug again, and that that we can go to openings in Indian market and all of these things. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to again thank the Kerns for helping to sponsor this event, and for the Autry, who's been really supportive of me as an artist, and many other contemporary artists as well. So I just want to say that and tell you all, stay safe, wear the masks, quit watching all that news, because it just is.
Yeah, it's like a rabbit hole. But that, thank you so much, Tony, for all of this and for sharing, just everything that's on your mind and in your walls, and work current. And this has been a real treat. I wanted to tell everybody listening today, also, we're really grateful that you took the time to be with us, to learn more about Masters, and where you can purchase Tony's work at Masters, and that painting in particular. You can just go to the autry.org/masters. And for more upcoming salons of this nature, I believe we have just scheduled one with the wonderful ceramic sculptor, Tammy Garcia. So stay tuned for that. Thanks again to Tony, to the Kerns, and to everybody for joining us this afternoon. It's a lot of fun.